that word you use?
Spoilers.
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 Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers.
I like that word.
I thought you might.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Review Who, finally, and we are once again back in glorious colour, albeit very briefly. So, line up 2 by 2 and get ready to embark upon the Ark. The Ark is another of those Doctor Who stories I don't watch very often, and I have to admit, when I do sit down and watch it, I end up thinking, this is why I don't watch it very often. It's not a bad story, if anything, it's quite the opposite. With the initial subplot dealing with the concept of how something as simple as the common cold can be fatal under the right or wrong circumstances, it has an almost War of the Worlds feel, but with the added twist that it could be fatal to both sides. And the main plot taking the focus of how actions can have a ripple effect and have devastating consequences that may not be perceived at the time. And, although perhaps not intentional for its time, it also presents an interesting commentary on diseases and how those who have them are perceived. But ultimately, it's another of those stories which, whilst it does have action, feels very dialogue heavy, with most of the plot being told through by its words and not the actions on screen. The previously mentioned common cold aspect of the plot takes up very little of it, but is integral to the main plot focus. At the time of recording this video, the latest Doctor Who episode to be shown on TV was Orphan 55. Now, the less said about that, the better, but this story was the latest in a long line of stories which depicted Earth's future and also its potential demise. And that's important because the Ark was the first TV story to do this, with the majority of the plot focusing on Earth's survivors, their servants the Monoids, the subsequent power struggle which emerges not only between the two, but also within the Monoids' own ranks, and lastly the invasion/colonisation of a new planet, which in turn presents the most interesting story aspect of this story. Because whilst there isn't a single story scene which stands out, this general plot point speaks volumes about human nature and, assuming we survive that long as a species, a dilemma that we will inevitably face millions of years to come in the future. As I previously mentioned, there isn't a whole lot of action in this story. What little there is covered by explanatory dialogue, and the rest you feel could have just happened off screen and you could have just been told about it later. But in a sense, that works in the favour of the story because it doesn't feel out of sync with the dialogue, with the pacing of the two evening out very nicely. And whilst there is perhaps less action in this than other stories, if anything stands out for me, it's the court scene at the end of episode 1.
Take them into custody, and later they will be made to suffer for the crime that they have committed.
And the penultimate scene of episode 4, in which the humans agree to live in peace.
We'll do everything we can to assist you in settling on our planet, but one thing you must do.
What's that?
Make peace with the Monoids.
He's right.
Now, these two scenes might seem vastly in contrast with each other, but that's kind of the point. The former shows how humans will often act out of aggressively, often in fear, as is our nature, but the latter shows that we are capable of better. And whilst it's very much the dialogue of those scenes which tells that point, without the action to go along with it, it would have far less impact. The Ark is another of those Doctor Who stories which has very little behind-the-scenes trivia. However, one thing some of you may notice when watching the story is how much Dodo's delivery differs, ranging from a well-spoken accent
We don't even know that we're on Earth.
Well, it couldn't be anywhere else now, could it?
to something more similar to a Cockney.
What's the matter? Are you crying?
Nobody knows he's running.
This was because during rehearsal, Dodo's actress Jackie Lane spoke the lines with a Cockney accent. However, before recording, the production team were told by their superiors that it was unacceptable for characters to speak in anything other than BBC English. As such, it would seem that Lane found it difficult to adapt to this change during the recording sessions, as her accent does differ, and due to there being limited retakes during filming, these differing accent takes were the ones that were used. However, it would seem this rule imposed by these superiors was very much relaxed in later years, as characters such as Ben Jackson were heard speaking with a very thick Cockney accent. The Ark is not a personal favourite of mine, but that being said, it's definitely a story to watch. Whilst perhaps not the most historically significant story in the show's run, and the Monoids certainly leave a lot to be desired when compared to the likes of the Daleks and the Cybermen, the story itself is a great one, due in no small part to the pacing of the action and the narrative of the dialogue, balancing out each other very well, meaning that whilst it might feel a little bit lacking at times, it's just enough to keep you intrigued. I'd almost go so far as to say, if you're starting out with classic Doctor Who, this is certainly a story to have in your starter pack. It provides a good experience of dialogue-based stories without throwing too much at you too soon. But that brings to a close another Review Who. Now, just before I go, I would just like to announce something which I've decided to do. As I'm going through the classic stories, it's obviously going to take me quite a while. So what I'm also going to try doing now is to do new series stories starting from Rose alongside the classic Review Who. The reason for this is simply because by the time I start getting to the new series stories, they're going to be well out of date. So I thought I would start with Rose and work my way through the new series, as I've got quite a lot of backlog to work my way through, and I can still continue working my way through the classic stories. But that brings to a close the end of this video. As always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like, favorite, subscribe, share, it really helps me out. Look at the description below for a link to my Patreon. I'm doing my very first figure animation and you can get involved. There's exclusive content and rewards for those who do so, and funding my Patreon in any way gets your name at the end of my videos. I salute you all, and I will see you with another video very soon.